saved my life. Thank you.
You are alone?
I have 2 droids. We've come in search of a ship that crashed near here.
Maybe I can help you. I am Boba Fett. The ship you seek is nearby.
Are the Imperial troops near this planet?
They are here, friend, and growing more powerful.
How far away?
Settle down. All they do is eat.
This is all we have, but he's welcome to it.
You are foolish to waste your kindness on this dumb creature. No lower life form is worth going hungry for, friend.
Making his first cinematic appearance in Empire Strikes Back with only 4 lines of dialogue and 6 minutes and 32 seconds of screen time, the bounty hunter Boba Fett quickly became one of Star Wars' most popular and recognizable characters. Boba Fett was introduced publicly at the 1978 San Anselmo County Fair, and later making his very first TV appearance in the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special on November 17th of 1978. Little was known about Fett. With such short speaking parts, audiences came to realize in the prequel trilogy, more specifically in the 2002 film Attack of the Clones, Boba Fett was revealed to be the unaltered clone of the bounty hunter Jango Fett, who was raising Boba as his son. A young Boba Fett would go on to later make appearances in the TV show Star Wars Clone Wars. We see, after the events of Attack of the Clone, Boba quickly integrated into a group of bounty hunters, later training under the most notorious bounty hunter, Cad Bane. This would later lead Boba to become one of the galaxy's greatest bounty hunters of all time. Although Fett seemingly met his doom in the Sarlacc pit on Tatooine after falling into the Great Pit of Carcoon, Boba survived the beast and lived to reclaim his armor, taking over the throne at Jabba's palace. And that leads us to the Book of Boba Fett. So I was trying to wait for a little bit to do this video to get everybody a chance to watch the show. So there will absolutely be spoilers in this video. And without further ado, let's just get into the show. So the first 2 episodes start off relatively well. We haven't seen Boba Fett since we saw him in the 2nd season of The Mandalorian. We get to finally see in live action just how Boba Fett escapes the Sarlacc pit. And we've seen in other iterations of Boba Fett through comic books and TV shows and video games that The Empire Strikes Back was not going to be the last time that we see the world's greatest bounty hunter. We get some really interesting backstory into the Tusken Raiders, which were previously just characters always in the background. They were actually first seen in A New Hope. And this brings me to the first thing about this show that I actually really like, is the fleshing out of the Tusken Raiders. I always love when Star Wars takes a moment to expand on its lore and make the world building that much more realistic. We get to see that there's actually a spiritual side behind the Tusken Raiders. After a little bit of back and forth, the Tusken Raiders take Boba Fett in and kind of treat him as one of their own. This leads to a culmination of all this training and weeks of Boba Fett living with the Tusken Raiders and seeing how they live. This is a rather beautiful scene that I think is probably the highlight of this show, to be honest. The reason being because we actually get some more in-depth backstory on Boba Fett, even though we've already had this history with him. The Tuskens are so comfortable with Boba that they let him undergo this mysterious ritual, which involves a lizard crawling up Boba Fett's nose, which in turn causes him to go on this spiritual journey. We get imagery of Old Camino, the planet that Boba Fett was born on and all clones were born on, which finally leads him to what is called the Ghafi tree. This spiritual journey involved Boba Fett breaking off a branch from the Ghafi tree and bringing it back to the Tusken Raiders. The imagery of this spiritual awakening or journey that Boba Fett goes through is rather interesting, and we later find out that Tatooine, known to be a sandy planet that we've known forever, was formerly thousands and thousands of years ago covered in a topography of water, not dissimilar to the planet Camino. The Tuskens take this Ghafi stick that Boba has gotten from the tree and mold it and shape it into a weapon that we first saw Boba Fett use in the 2nd season of The Mandalorian. The first 2 episodes are the most, in my opinion, solid storytelling. The problems that we start to run into are the stories with the Tusken Raiders are all told through flashbacks. We see Boba healing in a bacta tank, and then we are suddenly rushed back to these memories and told about this story with the Tusken Raiders. I wish I could say all of it was as interesting as this mysterious Ghafi tree and the spiritual journey that Boba Fett goes through. However, it's not. In present day, we're seeing Boba Fett with his partner Fennec Shand that we also see in Mandalorian try to step into the former shoes of Jabba the Hutt as being the crime lord daimyo of Tatooine, more specifically the city of Tatooine, Mos Espa. These present day scenes consist of Boba going from one person to another, trying to earn respect of this city of Mos Espa, which gets us to a lot of people's complaints in the show as it being uninteresting and Boba Fett uncharacteristically acting too nice. On its own, I have no problem with a good-hearted, good-natured, kind protagonist in a story. However, this is Boba Fett we're talking about, the most dangerous bounty hunter in the galaxy. The man that froze Han Solo in carbonite and heartlessly sold him off to Jabba the Hutt in the original movies. Which, the characterization in this show is a stark contrast to how we just saw him in the second season of Mandalorian.
I've been tracking you, Mandalorian.
If I'm talking about The Mandalorian a lot, I mean, I'm even wearing a Mandalorian shirt, it's because this show largely has a Din Djarin-shaped shadow over it the entire time. Which, the irony is not lost on me that The Mandalorian Din Djarin was originally supposed to be a newfangled version of Boba Fett. And now, interestingly enough, The Mandalorian is more famous and more recognized in Star Wars and pop culture media than the original bounty hunter Boba Fett. Which I don't quite know how to feel about. I mean, Boba Fett is one of my favorite Star Wars characters, and The Mandalorian has since usurped that position. In present time, after Boba goes around trying to talk to the governor and different people of power in Mos Espa, Boba quickly finds out that a group called the Pike Syndicate has a lot of control over Tatooine, largely due in part to the Pikes having what's called a spice trade through the city, which is basically the Star Wars version of moving different drugs through the city. Through this, we establish the initial antagonists being Jabba the Hutt's cousins. They come to town after hearing Boba is trying to fill the shoes of their fallen cousin. Because as we know, Jabba met his timely end at the end of Return of the Jedi. So, at the end of the second episode, we have some pretty solid antagonists. Through the cousins of Jabba the Hutt, they introduce Black Chrysanthemum, who had a bit of a rivalry, if you would read any of like the comics or the novels, with Boba Fett. So this sets up some exciting potential for these two to butt heads, which unfortunately leads me to the next episode being my least favorite of the entire series. In the third and fourth episode, we realize that after Boba has led the Tuskens on this really cool train heist type scene, the Tuskens are all murdered basically immediately. And of course, this is off screen. We don't get to see if there's any survivors. And the flashbacks stories come to an immediate halt. Episode 3 is my least favorite in the whole series because it introduces this ragtag gang of cyborgs that initially gets brought to Boba Fett's attention by a town member who comes to complain about them. Him and Fennec go see what's up with them, and he basically recruits them to be a part of his gang. With basically no struggle. I mean, these characters are set up to be these interesting street toughs that have these cybernetic alterations, but they end up looking like the costume designers went out to Party City, grabbed anything that looked futuristic, and just slapped it on them. Not to mention these bikes. The bikes. I hate them so much. The bikes I despise. I despise them so much. They're Power Ranger, bright colors that don't entirely match the aesthetic of Star Wars whatsoever. Throughout this entire show, I was completely distracted anytime these bikes were on the screen because they were so off-putting and just completely took me out of whatever the story was trying to do. The characters also were kind of flat and didn't really do anything for the narrative or add to Boba Fett's story. They try to spice things up with this extremely slow race that you can tell was meant to have this high intensity and exciting fast-paced scene. But it ended up coming across as just cheap and kind of rushed. I really don't like these characters and they're possibly my least favorite part of this show. Not possibly, they are my least favorite part of this show. That leads us to episode 4, which is kind of a really good episode. It tries to pick back up the steam that they very much so lost in the 3rd episode. We get to see another flashback in the form of Boba trying to get his ship, the Slave One, back. And he recruits Fennec Shand, who just had a very intense ordeal with the Mandalorian. We saw this all go down in the 1st season of The Mandalorian, so this picks up just right after the episode of Fennec Shand being shot. Boba takes Fennec to this alteration shop, which we later find out is responsible for all of the cybernetic kids running through this town. The alteration shop leader being played by the one and only Thundercat, which I had no idea he was going to be in this episode. That makes the cybernetic kids almost excusable because Thundercat's just so cool. Like, go listen to any of his music. I love this man so much. Hold me close and let me squeeze you tight. So Thundercat's character basically replaces Fennec Shand's stomach that we saw also in Mandalorian, because in the 2nd season when Fennec Shand comes back, she makes the appearance with Boba Fett, and we see how she actually survived this shot. Since Boba was so kind to help Fennec Shand become a cyborg, she decides to help him go retrieve the Slave One from Jabba's palace, that at the time was being ran by Bib Fortuna. Now, narratively, this all makes sense. They save the Slave One and escape successfully after ducking and dodging different people around Jabba's palace. Then I guess Boba's next step is to go retrieve his armor, which would still be in the Sarlacc pit. But this is interesting. In Mandalorian Season 2, when we see Cobb Vanth, who initially had Boba's armor, who got it from Jawa's, and I was just under the impression that Boba felt himself being stripped of his armor after he escaped the Sarlacc pit. We even see the iconic scene of Boba's fist breaking through the sand still in his plated armor. So it doesn't necessarily make too much sense for Boba to still think that the armor would be in the Sarlacc pit, but we move on. Now, at the end of episode 4, we get this really exciting teaser to Mando coming back, which we're super excited for. I love the character so much. We get Garrison's wonderful Mando theme with the... And then we get episode 5 and episode 6, which here come my major mixed feelings about these 2 episodes, and subsequently the finale. Episode 5 and episode 6 were primarily based on The Mandalorian. They felt like Mando episodes, and it felt like we were watching Mandalorian Season 3, which I was super excited for at the time. Watching this episode, it was a complete surprise. I had no idea Mando would be back in this much of a force. We knew that he would probably make some sort of cameo in the Book of Boba Fett, but we didn't know to what extent or how long he would stay around. But unfortunately, as excited as I was to see Mando back in action, it felt cheap. It felt like fans of Boba Fett were being robbed of now the more popular character taking the spotlight on Boba's own show. These 2 episodes mainly have to do with Mando coming to terms with the fact that he's taken his helmet off, broken the Mandalorian creed, this is not the way.
This is the way.
The Mandalorian creed is you never let anybody else see your face. They always have this very strict dogma of keeping their helmet on at all times. We have this amazing opening scene to the episode of Mando using the dark saber, but the saber's heavy and he eventually cuts himself, but he still gets his bounty. This entire first part of the episode takes place on this really cool Halo-esque planet. I don't know if it would be a planet, but it's like a system. Mando goes back to the armor, which we find out is still alive. Her position at the end of season 1 of The Mandalorian was left in quite a precarious way. We didn't know if she died or if she escaped, but she is still alive, along with her right-hand man, Tar Vizsla, who ends up wanting to challenge Mando for the Darksaber because he is actually a descendant of the founder of the Mandalorians, the first wielder of the Darksaber. Mando, of course, wins this duel, but the armor finds out that Boba has showed his face to somebody else. In the Mandalorian show, if you don't remember, he revealed his face actually 3 times. One to the robot in the first season, which doesn't necessarily count because the robot wasn't human. Second time, he took his helmet off to do the facial recognition thing in the Empire camp that we saw. And the third time, of course, to let Grogu see his face one last time before he goes off with Luke. It's clear that Mando misses Grogu, and he has the armorer make a little present for Grogu out of the Beskar spear that we saw Mando wielding at the end of Season 2. These episodes essentially should have been saved for Mandalorian Season 3, in my humble opinion. I think that Boba Fett deserved to have all of his episodes, and he's only in 5 of them out of 7, which feels cheap. It feels like the show just ran out of time or just lost interest in the story of Boba Fett. Which I don't think I've ever seen a show so rapidly pivot from the main character who the story is being told about. I mean, it's called The Book of Boba Fett. I get Mando's the more popular character and, you know, the more bankable character at this point in Star Wars history, but it feels like dedicating these 2 episodes to Mando and Grogu and how all their stories tie up does both shows, The Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian, a big disservice. For Mandalorian, you're shoehorning major plot beats that was left as a major cliffhanger at the end of the 2nd season into another show that is supposed to be about somebody else. And for The Book of Boba Fett loses time to really get his story told. Boba Fett is a great character, and there's so much lore that you could really delve deep inside and pull a lot of the stories from the comics as well. It just, however, seems like the writers didn't quite know what to do with Boba Fett after episode 4. Is it cool that we get to see Grogu training with a CGI Luke? Yes, it's amazing. Is it cool that we get to see Boba in this new ship that is a stark reference to the prequels and the ship that Anakin flew in The Phantom Menace? Yes, this is absolutely awesome for a Star Wars fan. But why is it that all this has to take place within another character's show? It would be one thing if Mando wasn't more popular at this point than Boba, and the show was just kind of lending a hand to another character. But I think the biggest crime is that the spotlight is just completely taken from Boba. Even in the finale with this big reveal of Cad Bane returning, which was done extremely well in episode 6. Cad Bane showed up like the gunslinger in town, head honcho, and really made you believe that he was a bloodthirsty bounty hunter. But it's like the show presents such cool concepts and then just almost throws them away at the drop of a dime. After the finale, I felt so conflicted because there were so many cool things that I enjoyed, and the story of Grogu and Mando and the reunion between the 2 of them was amazing and heartwarming to see. I just wish episode 5 and 6 and even some of episode 7 was just episodes 1 through 3 of the season 3 of Mandalorian. You could have told a much more interesting story about Boba Fett and his rivalry with Cad Bane throughout the years, because we've seen the beginning of this in Clone Wars, and as a kid Boba Fett had been training with Cad Bane to become the great bounty hunter that we find out who Boba Fett is eventually. There's even an unfinished episode of Clone Wars where we find out that Cad Bane was the one who put the dent in the helmet of Boba Fett in the first place. That's just great lore and backstory that you really could have delved deep into with this show. Ultimately, Boba does end up killing Cad Bane, and I think that that is only poetically right. The student succeeding the master. However, both characters would have benefited so much more by a season-long rivalry building up to this final battle that only had 2 episodes to really breathe in the show. There's so many cool things that happen in the Boba Fett, Book of Boba Fett season finale, like Mando and Boba teaming up, having this cool dual jetpack scene, taking out a bunch of the different pikes, or Boba riding a Rancor through the town, which I feel like is Jon Favreau's direct reference to the Star Wars Christmas special. And even the cute scene of Grogu through the Force subduing the Rancor after the Rancor is like raging through the town. There's so much to enjoy here. There's so much great Star Wars and cool scenes. However, do any of these scenes do much of a service to the character of Boba Fett? Unfortunately, I don't think so, and I leave this show not really having a good idea of who Boba Fett is as a character. But that's my thoughts on it, you guys. I really enjoyed this show, contrary to all of my negative talking points. I'm just a big Star Wars fan, and I would love to see that if these shows are about these characters, have them be all the way about these characters and really delve deep into who they are at their core. Give them motivations and don't just have them doing random things and going from person to person trying to make a storyline happen. But anyways, guys, tell me down in the comments what you thought of Book of Boba Fett. Tell me what you would like to see in Star Wars in the future. We know that the Obi-Wan show is coming out in May, which we are super excited for, and we will definitely talk about here on this channel. But until then, guys, be sure to like and comment and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And until next time, I'll see you guys, and I love you. Bye-bye.